What if the exact moment your entire life falls apart is the moment your real life actually begins? Not as a metaphor, not as something you tell yourself at 2 a.m. to feel better, as a documented, repeatable, almost mechanical process that one of the richest men on the planet used to rebuild himself from nothing. His name is Ray Dalio, and before he became the founder of the largest hedge fund in human history, he lost everything. Not some of it, everything. Dalio's book, Principles, Life and Work, is not a memoir dressed up as advice. It is closer to a machine's blueprint, written by a man who genuinely believes your life could be engineered like a system, once you strip away the ego that keeps getting in the way. Inside the vault, we treat this book differently than the internet does. Most people know the highlight reel: believability, weighted decision-making, radical transparency. What almost nobody understands is the brutal event that forced him to build any of it in the first place. By the end of this video, you will understand the exact 5-step process Dalio used to turn catastrophic failure into the most successful investment firm in the world. But there are 2 questions sitting underneath everything we're about to cover. One is about what almost destroyed him before any of this worked. The other is about what this system demands from you personally, something most people watching this will quietly resist. Both of those questions only fully resolved by the end. The strategic breakdown, the crash that built the system. Let's start with a story Dalio doesn't lead with, even though it's the reason everything else in this book exists at all. In 1982, Dalio made a public, aggressive bet that the global economy was heading into a depression. He was so confident he testified about it in front of Congress. He went on television, and then the exact opposite happened. The market didn't crash. It began one of the greatest bull runs in American history, and Dalio was catastrophically, publicly wrong. Here's where most success stories soften the blow. This one doesn't. Dalio lost so much money he couldn't pay his own employees. One by one, he had to lay off people he considered family until Bridgewater, the firm that would eventually manage over $100 billion, was down to exactly one person. Him. He was so broke he had to borrow $4,000 from his own father just to cover his family's bills. In an interview later recounted on Business Insider's The Bottom Line, Dalio described the experience as a series of blows to the head with a baseball bat. Sit with that for a second, because this is where most people watching this video quietly check out. You've had your own version of this. Maybe not $4,000 from your dad, but a moment where the plan you were so sure about detonated in front of everyone who was watching. The instinct in that moment is to protect your ego, to explain it away, to move fast past the humiliation before anyone notices how deep it went. Dalio did the opposite, and that decision is the entire reason you're watching a video about him instead of someone else. He later said that being so wrong and so publicly wrong changed him from someone who thought "I'm right" into someone who obsessively asked, "How do I know I'm right?" That single shift in language is not a minor detail. It's the hinge the entire rest of this book swings on. Most summaries skip this entirely, treating principles like a list of leadership hacks lifted out of context. But you cannot understand believability, weighted decision-making, or radical transparency, or any framework that made him wealthy without first understanding that all of it was built directly on top of public, humiliating failure. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Dalio has said in multiple interviews since that going broke in 1982 was one of the best things that ever happened to him, not despite the pain. Because of it, he needed the fear and the humility that came from nearly losing everything, because without it, he believes he would have stayed arrogant, overconfident, and eventually wrong again in a way that would have ended him for good. The crash didn't happen to his career. It built it. There is a reason we opened this video with a question about the moment everything falls apart. You are about to see, piece by piece, exactly what Dalio built out of that wreckage. And if you've ever quietly wondered whether your own worst moment might actually be doing something useful to you right now, this next chapter is where that question starts getting an answer. Embrace reality and deal with it. Now, we move into what Dalio considers the actual starting point of every principle in this book, the chapter called Embrace Reality and Deal with It. Most people think optimism means believing things will work out. Dalio's version is colder and, honestly, more useful. He argues that pain plus reflection equals progress, and that the people who succeed aren't the ones who avoid painful truths. They're the ones who run directly at them, extract the lesson, and refuse to let the same mistake repeat itself twice. This is where the book quietly separates itself from every generic motivational message you've absorbed for years. You've probably been told to think positive, to visualize success, to trust the process. Dalio is telling you something almost opposite. Reality doesn't care what you wish were true. The market didn't care that Dalio was confident. Your business, your relationship, your body, none of them care what story you're telling yourself. The vault perspective on this is different. Comfort with denial is not a personality trait. It's a cost, and you're paying it right now in ways you haven't tallied up. Out of this philosophy, Dalio built what he calls the 5-step process for getting what you want out of life. Set clear goals. Identify the problems standing in your way and refuse to tolerate them. Diagnose those problems down to their actual root cause instead of the symptoms sitting on the surface. Design a solution specific enough to get around the real obstacle, and then do the uncomfortable work of pushing that design through to an actual result. Almost nobody does all 5. Most people are addicted to step 1, the fantasy of the goal, and quietly terrified of step 3, the diagnosis that might implicate them personally. Here's the internal monologue a lot of you are running right now without saying it out loud. You know exactly what your root problem is. You've known for a while. It's not a mystery. It's not a lack of information. It's not that you haven't read enough books. It's that naming it clearly, out loud, means you can no longer pretend you didn't see it. Dalio would tell you that discomfort is not a signal to stop, is the exact signal that you're finally looking at something real instead of something comfortable. This is where mainstream advice collapses completely. Mainstream advice tells you to protect your self-image while you chase your goals, to frame every setback gently, to be kind to yourself in a way that often just means avoiding the truth. Dalio's version of kindness looks completely different. He'd argue that the kindest thing you can do for your future self is to be brutally honest with your current self, right now, about what isn't working and why. Anything softer than that isn't actually compassion. It's just a slower, more comfortable way to fail. If you leave with nothing else from this video, leave with this. Pain is not proof that you're doing something wrong. In Dalio's framework, pain is frequently proof that you're finally doing something right because you stopped avoiding the reality that was always there. The 5-step process only works if you're willing to sit in that discomfort long enough to diagnose it properly. Most people design solutions for the wrong problem because they never let themselves feel bad enough for long enough to find the real one underneath. Radical truth and radical transparency. Now we enter the chapter that transformed Dalio from a wealthy investor into someone Fortune magazine would later call one of the most influential people in the world. The chapter called Radical Truth and Radical Transparency. After the 1982 collapse, Dalio didn't just decide to be more careful. He decided to build an entire organization where hiding the truth, softening feedback, or protecting egos was treated as a structural threat to the company's survival. He called the result an idea meritocracy, and it's a phrase that sounds abstract until you understand what it actually demanded of the people inside it. An idea meritocracy, in Dalio's own framing, is the sum of radical truth plus radical transparency plus a weighted decision-making process. Remove any one of those 3 ingredients and the whole system collapses back into ordinary office politics, where the loudest or most senior voice wins regardless of whether they're actually right. Most companies claim to want honest feedback. Almost none of them are willing to build the actual infrastructure that makes honesty survivable for the person giving it. At Bridgewater, this wasn't a slogan on a wall. Meetings were recorded. Junior analysts were expected, not just permitted, to openly challenge senior executives, including Dalio himself, if they believed the reasoning was flawed. The idea was almost uncomfortably simple. Truth has to matter more than hierarchy, more than seniority, more than anyone's feelings in the room, including yours. Dalio has said this environment took new employees roughly a year to adjust to, and that a meaningful number of people never adjusted at all. They left because being told the truth about your own thinking constantly by people junior to you is a specific kind of pain most professional environments are carefully designed to avoid. Here's a personal confrontation worth sitting with. Think about the last time someone gave you real, unfiltered feedback about something you were doing wrong, something that actually stung. Now think honestly about how you responded. Did you get curious or did you get defensive? Most people, if they're honest, get defensive first and curious only later, if at all. Dalio's entire system is built on the assumption that your defensiveness is the single biggest obstacle standing between you and the version of yourself that actually succeeds. This is where mainstream advice collapses again. Mainstream advice tells you to build a supportive environment. Surround yourself with people who believe in you. Protect your confidence while you're growing. Dalio's version inverts that almost entirely. He'd argue that a room full of people who only affirm you is not support. It's a slow, comfortable way to stay wrong. Real support, in his framework, looks like people who are willing to risk the relationship in order to tell you something true, because they respect you enough to believe you can handle it. And here's the emotional reversal underneath all of it. It sounds brutal on the surface. This idea of constant, unfiltered honesty aimed directly at you from every direction. But Dalio's argument is that the brutality is actually the mercy. A world that lies to you gently is a world that lets you stay comfortable while you slowly fail. A world that tells you the truth, even when it stings, is the only kind of world where real growth is even possible. The discomfort isn't the cost of this system. The discomfort is the entire mechanism by which it works. Believability. Weighted decision-making. This next idea may be the most emotionally charged concept in the entire video, so pay close attention. Not everyone's opinion should count the same amount. Say that out loud in most rooms today, and you'll get uncomfortable silence. But Dalio built one of the most successful financial institutions in history on exactly that premise. And once you understand why, you may never think about disagreement the same way again. Dalio calls it believability weighted decision-making, and the mechanics are more specific than they first sound. A believable person, in his framework, is someone with two things: a demonstrated track record of being right about this exact type of decision before, and the ability to clearly explain the cause and effect reasoning behind their conclusion, not just the conclusion itself. Someone who's right but can't explain why is less believable than someone who's right and can walk you through the logic. Confidence alone means nothing. Track record plus reasoning means everything. This solves a problem most organizations and most people never even name out loud. In a normal meeting, decisions get made autocratically, where the loudest or most senior person simply wins, or democratically, where every opinion counts equally regardless of who's actually qualified to have one. Dalio watched both models fail repeatedly. Believability weighting was his answer, a system fast enough to act with the confidence of a single decisive leader, but grounded enough in actual expertise to avoid the blind spots that come from listening to just one voice. Here's the anticipation gateway, because this next distinction changes how you'll sit in every meeting for the rest of your life. Dalio breaks people in any room into three categories. Teachers, who have earned the right to make confident statements and should be doing most of the talking on their subject. Students, who should mostly be asking questions rather than offering conclusions. And peers, who comment on what they genuinely understand and ask on what they don't. The devastating question underneath this framework is simple. Which one are you, actually, in the rooms you sit in, and are you behaving like it? The deeper layer most readers miss is this. Believability weighting isn't about silencing people. It's about creating a system honest enough that everyone, including the most junior person in the room, can see exactly why their input carried the weight it did. Nobody's shut out permanently. A student who develops a track record earns their way toward teacher status over time. The system isn't rigid hierarchy dressed up in new language. It's a meritocracy with receipts, one that rewards being right over being loud, and rewards it consistently enough that people stop performing confidence they haven't earned. There's a version of you that resents this idea a little, and that resentment is worth noticing rather than dismissing. Most of us want our opinions to count fully right now, regardless of our track record on the subject. But Dalio would gently point out that this resentment is exactly the ego his entire system was designed to route around. The goal was never to make you feel important in every conversation. The goal was to make the collective decision as accurate as possible, and accuracy, over time, has a way of making the people who pursue it seriously become genuinely important anyway. Build the machine, not just the outcome. This chapter feels like a natural place to close the case, because it brings together everything you've heard so far into one final, unifying idea. But stay with us, because there's a deeper layer here that most people watching a video like this one never get to. Dalio's core belief, running underneath every principle in this book, is that you should think of your life and your organization not as a series of isolated outcomes, but as a machine, one you can diagnose, redesign, and continuously improve using the exact same process every single time. At Bridgewater, this idea took a strange, specific shape. Dalio built what became known internally as baseball cards for every employee. Structured profiles distilling each person's demonstrated strengths and weaknesses, built from real data rather than office reputation or personality. The purpose wasn't to embarrass anyone. It was to make believability weighting actually possible at scale, because you cannot weight someone's input fairly if their track record only exists as vague office folklore. The machine needed real data, not impressions, to function the way Dalio designed it to. Here's the false ending. The moment this might feel like it's wrapping up, you could walk away right now thinking this entire video has been about decision-making frameworks for finance professionals. Something interesting but distant from your actual life. That would be a mistake, and it's the exact mistake most summaries of this book make, because the deeper layer is this: Dalio isn't really describing a hedge fund. He's describing a repeatable engine for turning failure into refinement at any scale, in any domain, whether you're running a company or just trying to stop repeating the same relationship mistake for the 5th time. The machine only works if you treat outcomes as data rather than verdicts on your worth. A bad result isn't proof you're incapable. It's information about where the machine's design failed, information you can use immediately to redesign it. This is the exact same 5-step process from earlier in this masterclass, applied at the level of your entire life instead of a single decision. Goals, problems, root causes, redesign, execution, on a loop indefinitely without the emotional flinch that usually stops most people from running that loop honestly more than once or twice. If you leave with nothing else from this entire video, leave with this final piece. Dalio has said the principles themselves, not anything unusually special about him personally, are what he credits for Bridgewater's success. That's not false modesty. It's the whole thesis of the book stated plainly. The system is transferable. The machine can be rebuilt by anyone willing to embrace reality, tell the truth even when it costs them, weigh decisions by actual believability instead of ego, and treat every failure as raw material instead of a verdict. That machine is what turned a broke, humiliated investor with 1 employee into the founder of the largest hedge fund on earth. Key lessons and insights. Pain is data, not verdict. Let's start unpacking what actually matters from everything we just covered, beginning with the lesson called Pain is data, not verdict. Pain plus reflection equals progress, and the operative word is reflection, not just pain itself. Plenty of people suffer setbacks and learn nothing, because they treat the setback as proof of who they are rather than information about what they did. Next time something in your business or your life goes wrong, resist the urge to internalize it as a character verdict. Ask instead what the failure is actually trying to teach you about the design. The Believability Test. Remember the question we opened with about what this system demands from you personally. Here's part of the answer. Before your next opinion in a meeting, a group chat, or a family argument, ask yourself honestly whether you're a teacher, a student, or a peer on this exact topic. Most conflict in relationships and workplaces comes from people speaking with teacher-level confidence on subjects where they're actually students. Applying this single distinction, honestly, changes how people experience you almost immediately. Radical honesty starts with yourself. The hardest version of radical transparency isn't telling other people the truth. It's telling yourself the truth about your own weaknesses without flinching or softening the language. Dalio built an entire company around exposing people's weaknesses openly because he believed hidden weaknesses were more dangerous than visible ones. In your own life, this means naming your actual weakness in plain, specific language rather than a vague, forgiving version of it. The specific version is the only one useful enough to design around. The 5-step loop never stops. This is where discipline separates from motivation permanently. Dalio's 5-step process, goals, problems, diagnosis, design, execution isn't a one-time fix you apply and move past. It's a loop you run continuously on your business, your money, your relationships, your health, for the rest of your life. The people who actually change aren't the ones who found the right insight once. They're the ones willing to run this same uncomfortable loop again and again, especially in the exact areas where they'd rather not look too closely. Your crash might be building something. And that brings us to the first question we started with, about what almost destroyed Dalio before any of this worked. His 1982 collapse wasn't a footnote before the real story. It was the origin of every principle that followed. If you're currently in your own version of that moment, broke, embarrassed, publicly wrong about something you were sure of, Dalio's story isn't a comfort to make you feel better. It's evidence, specific and documented, that the collapse can become the exact material the rebuild is made from, if you're willing to look at it honestly, instead of running from it. The vault closing. Books like this one rarely change your circumstances the moment you close them. What they change, if you let them, is the standard you're willing to accept from your own thinking going forward. Dalio didn't become who he became because he avoided being wrong. He became who he became because he built a system that made being wrong survivable, useful, even necessary. That's a different kind of confidence than the one most people chase, and it's available to you starting with decisions far smaller than a hedge fund. Here's the one concrete action worth taking in the next 7 days. Pick a single decision you're currently avoiding, something you already sense you know the honest answer to. Write down, in plain language, what you'd tell a friend to do if they described this exact situation to you. Then run it through Dalio's 5 steps directly. Name the goal. Name the real problem, not the comfortable version of it. Diagnose why it's actually happening. Design one specific move. And do it before the 7 days are up, even if it's small. And remember the second question we opened with, about what this entire system demands from you personally. It demands that you stop protecting your ego at the exact moments protecting it costs you the most. That's the real price of admission into everything Dalio built. If this video gave you something worth sitting with, that's exactly what this channel exists for. And there are ambitious people building the same kind of clarity in the comments right now. Like this video, subscribe if you want more of these deep strategic breakdowns, and tell us in the comments the one principle from this video you're actually going to apply this week.